When we've created a query, often we want to be able to enter different values rather than just have a hard-coded or a constant value in that query. For example, in our last query that we created, we had put in constants for the kind of ledger. We put in actuals, we put in the business unit, we put in the account number. But there's oftentimes that you'll create a query where you want the option to actually prompt for different types of criteria. So I'm going to use my query that I've created called RecXX. It's a requisition query, and we're going to add some prompts in here to help us when we have a query that we want to be able to enter different values in. And that's what prompts will do for us, runtime prompts. So I'm going to search for my query. There it is. I'm going to edit it. And notice I have several fields already selected: rec ID, rec date, entered date, rec name, and requester ID. And I've got on my query tab, it shows this is all coming from the rec header table. And the other thing I think I want to do is I want to join the rec line table to this. Do I have a rec line that I can join from hierarchy? No, we don't. And we'll talk more about joins there, but I'm going to go ahead and join this, hopefully just for the sake of time, to get a little bit more information here. And I'm not sure what the name of this is, so I'm going to just search on part of the name. And here it is, the rec line. I'm going to join that record. And I'm just going to join it to get some extra information to the rec header. It's going to give me some auto join criteria here, so I'm just going to accept what it's giving me. Because what we're really talking about, we're not talking about joins right now. What we want to talk about is other things like prompts. So I'm going to put a few things in here that I know are in this category: unit of measure, a merchandise amount, and I want to see if I can find the ship to IDs in here somewhere, but I'm not sure where. I think it's in this table. Well, I'm having a hard time finding it, so I think one of the things I'm going to do is, because I'm having difficulty, that's when this A to Z can come in handily. And let's see if I can find it that way. It's sorted everything by alpha order. I'm not seeing all my fields here, so I'm going to use my scroll buttons. And let's see, so it's not on this table. So I think what I'll do then is pull in another table. Let's get rid of this one. Let's look for another table. How about rec line ship? Okay, I'm not sure if this is the table I need. It looks like the right one. So I want to look at the fields. I'm on the records tab. This is something you can do when you're not sure what table to use. And I see I have a line number and a schedule number. So this looks like it's a child table even from the line. It's got a schedule number on here. It's got the ship to, customer ID. Does it have a regular ship to ID? Ship type ID? No. I think once again, I'm going to, oh, here we go. It's way at the top. So sometimes it takes a little looking to see if your field is on there. So this is a very typical way of working through queries. So I'm seeing it in rec line ship, which is good. But I'm thinking, since rec line ship, actually, the order is rec header, rec line ship, and then let rec line distrib. And we'll give you a resource on that. We call it the document lifecycle, and we'll include that in our resources to show you the relationship between all these tables. But I think I'll start by joining rec line ship. or a rec line. And as I join that to header, it's going to add everything I need in here. And I'm going to get rid of my A to Z because I really want to get these fields in the order that they're coming. I'll put the line number in here. I'm going to put in, see what else do I want? The merchandise amount, the source status. Has this been sourced to a PO or not? That looks pretty good. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add another record. And that is direct line ship. And say join. And instead of joining that to the header, I'm going to join it to rec line because it's got a lot of the same elements as rec line. It's got a line number and all these other things as well. And then the reason I'm joining is so I can pick up the ship to ID. So that's all I really want from that particular table. Now the other thing I might want here is, and this will be my fourth table that I'm adding, is the distrib line. So the distrib line, that's got all my accounting information in it. So I'm going to join that at the bottom after the C table. So now I've got I have scheduled number already, so I'm going to pick up the distrib line number. I'm going to pick up the requisition quantity and the merchandise amount. And I also want account number, department ID, fund code, all my chart fields in there, project ID. Awesome. Now I've got quite a bit of information in there. And let's look and see what the fields tab looks like. Oh yes, I've got quite a bit. I noticed though that I've got merchandise a couple times in here. I think I only want merchandise in there once, so I'm going to get rid of this top one. And now I've just got one merchandise line, one quantity line. It's from the distrib table, which works for me because that's the very detailed table of items on there. Now, one of the things I'll tell you about requisitions is we do have some really good queries out there. And remember that requisition queries are under FXPO. As you will note in the book, when you look at various types of query names, and if you've taken the online course for viewing queries and for searching for queries, that's the prerequisite to this course, then you'll see that you can search on various query names under FXAP for AP queries, FXPO for PO queries, and for ePro queries or eRequisition queries, and then FXGL for journals and ledger type information, as well as commitment control, or KK as we call it. So I've got my fields here, and the other thing I would like in here, I'm not seeing it. I see a source status, but I'm not seeing the rec status. So I'm going to go back to my query, and I think rec status is on the top in the header. So let's look there first. There it is. So I'm going to add rec status. And so rec status is all the way down here at the bottom. I think I'd like to have it closer to the top. So I think I'm going to use my reorder sort button. And I'm going to put rec status after the rec date. And 1, 2, and so 3. Remember that when you're changing the column order, you want to use the button, but use this side where it says new column. This side over here on the right is the side you use when you're sorting the data, the rows into a certain order. Okay, so now I've got my rec status is now showing up here at the top. I like that. Let's see what we have in criteria. I've already got requester ID is equal to ADDIE. And so that's really handy, but maybe I don't want requester ID to be just a straight constant. I might want it to be something else. So just for the sake of making sure that the query is working as designed so far, is what in the way that I want it to, let me just save it and run it and see what we get. Okay, I've picked up all of requester Addie's requisition lines that she's got out here. She's got some that are have a status P, some with a status A, and then we have over here a ship to ID on them. And so I've got some nice bits of information here on this. I know that some of these are for laboratory equipment, some are accounting supplies. So lots of good information because I've joined all those different tables. So now I'm going to go back to the fields area and go and look at what I've got here in my fields and say, let's see now, if I wanted to have a criteria for requester ID, and instead of using the one I have here, let me do this. Let me get rid of my requester ID and then save my query. But before I run it, because I'll pick up every requester in the world, the world of UCF financials, I want to go back over here and add a criteria. Now remember that one of the things I said about criteria is it's something that you can add from the Fields tab or you can add it from the Query tab. Fields tab is nice and easy because it has these lines across, and it's also showing everything you've already selected. The Query tab is only handy when you are not going to use an item in here for criteria, like business unit. Not for displaying, sorry. So business unit, I don't want to display, so I'm not going to click that, but I do click the cone to add it to the criteria. Well, that's handy for business unit, but for a lot of fields, it's going to be handier to go here because I've already selected them. I know where I want to drill down on. And for the sake of this query, what I want to do is I want to be able to put in different requesters here. So one of the requesters I want to be able to do is going to be Addie, but I might have some other requesters I want to add to try out too. So what I'm going to do is with requester ID, I'm going to select it as criteria. And now when I'm on the edit criteria properties, instead of entering Addie here, which is what I could do, but then I'll only ever always get Addie as my results. Instead of doing that, I'm going to put in a prompt. So I clicked on the prompt button over here on the expression 2 type, and it automatically changed this expression 2 area so that I could either select a prompt if one already exists, I can add a new prompt, or if I've already added a prompt, I can edit the prompt and make changes to it. I haven't got any prompts. I can even look to see. There are no prompts defined yet. So I'm going to add a new prompt. And now I'm adding it to requester ID, and notice that everything is all filled out from here. It already says requester, so I don't even need to make any kind of changes here if I don't need to. So, and then the other thing I want to pay attention to is the edit type. Most of the time you're going to pick up no table edit. Sometimes it will give you a prompt table, but it won't be anything you can use. So, for example, if I had a prompt table on here, and I can't even find one here, I could maybe look at rec and see if there's something out there. And that looks like a decent one, but it may not do anything for me. So what I want to do, if I see something like this, where there's a prompt table and a table there, let's just go ahead and get rid of it by going no value. And then I will change this back to no table edit. A lot of times they'll come up like this, but if they don't, you can always change them by first getting rid of the prompt table and then changing the edit type to no table edit. So everything is fine. There are only 3 areas here that I was really looking at. One of them was the header text. The other was to make sure my field name is the one I meant to prompt. And then also make sure that this area is clean with no prompt table and that the edit type is no table edit. So now I've got my prompt, and notice it shows it as a little :1. I'll say OK. And I have to go to criteria to look at it. So I clicked on the criteria tab, and here it is at the bottom. Itchy bit. Okay. So what I want to do then now is save my query and test it out by running it. So here it's giving me my requester. I'm making an assumption because it's not telling me what to do that it wants an equal and an actual value that's going to match correctly. And I'm going to say OK. And there it is. There's all the ADDIE-RECs. So what if I want to try and use a different user ID? I can rerun the query and put in a different requester ID here and see if my query is still working as expected, or if I get no values. If I'm satisfied, then I can just exit it. I can always rerun the query, get my Addie back in here if I want to put her in. And there's her items. So that's how you add a prompt. Now, what if I already have a prompt and I want to change it and make it a little bit more flexible? One of the ways that I can do that is using like criteria. And I can use like criteria by editing the criteria. So instead of saying an exact match to Addie, I'm going to use like criteria. And like is the criteria that you can use that says I can put in a partial value, add some wildcards to it, and get anything that is similar to that value. This is especially useful when you're doing departments, and we'll try that in a minute. So now I'm going to say like. And at this point now, instead of having my prompt just put the word requester out there, I think I'd like to let my user know that I'm using like as criteria. So I've already got my prompt, so now I'm going to edit my prompt. So once again, just like when we are editing fields and giving them a different heading, even with prompts, we want to make sure it knows I'm going to change this from the default to text. And so I'm going to say, instead of just heading text requester, I'm going to say head requester like %. And that's telling me that I can put in some variable values in there and pull up my requester. So now that I've added that little bit of text there and changed the heading type to text, I will say OK. That says like. I'm OK here. I'm going to save it. And now I'm going to run it. And so now, instead of putting in Addie, I can put in AD. And I may get other requesters with that. Let's see what happens. No, I still just get Addie. So apparently I don't have any other requesters to begin with AD. The other way that I could do this is I can run it just to make sure it's working well and say %DDY and have a wildcard for the beginning of that name. Once again, I just get Addie. We're under some constraints for this course because we want to make sure that we don't put in items that are people's actual user IDs on this demo. But if I would have put in, for example, some other user's ID, I could have done it with like just the beginning of the user ID. I know that their first name is say Mary, I can do MA, and that might bring up my user ID, my requester ID for that particular requester, or it may bring up several requesters whose NIDs or their user IDs, requester ID, begins with MA. So just a little bit of thought there on the idea of like, but let's use like for some other types of criteria. One of the other ways that we can use like would be for looking at different accounts. So let me prompt for account. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to go back to my Fields tab because I know I don't have anything for set up already for our account ID. So I'll go to Fields. I'm going to find the account number, and I'm going to again add criteria. You notice how that I'm adding criteria and prompts at the same time. So I've switched it to prompt. I don't have any prompts other than my prompt for requester ID, so now I'm going to add a new prompt. And I'm going to add it. And what I want to do is I want to be able to put different kinds of accounts. So I'm going to change my heading text to account like. And notice it already says no table edit, so I don't have to make any changes here. I did change my heading type to text and added some text on my heading text. And then also the other thing I need to do is change my condition type from equal to like. Because if I left it equal to, I could put in percents, but it's not going to make any difference. It'll be looking for percent. But like is the only one that can use the percent as a wildcard. So now I have a prompt. I have my like, and I say OK. And I'm going to, I think, go over to my simple little having tab to save it. Remember that having is the shortest tab, so then it's a good place to save. Then I'm going to run my query, and notice now I've got two sets of prompts to put in. So I'm going to put in Addie. Actually, what I could do is I could put in a percent for every requester with this. But I think I'll just put in Addie. And I'm going to put account type 7. And that's going to give me all her records that start with that expense account 7. Notice that I have 6 here. Now what I can do with my like is, say for example, I just wanted to pick up the 738 accounts. Let me rerun my query. I'm going to put Addie up here. And I'm going to put 738 and the percent sign, which is my wildcard. Now I only get the 738 accounts. Now say, for example, no, I really wanted to look at all her requisition lines that have 734 accounts and see what money we're spending there. So let me rerun my query again, put in Addie, and put in 734%. And see what I get. Whoops, I put in the wrong thing. If I would have put in $, I would have got nothing. All right, here we go. And now I've got only the lines that Addie has created and the requisitions for 734 account. And that you can do that type of thing. You can, department or project are really handy for that because we know that the significant numbers for separating out departments a lot of times are like the first 4 digits. And we can do the same thing with fund. If we were looking at different funds, we could put those in as a prompt. You can prompt on anything that you want to as long as it's contained in any of the fields that belong to the query tables that you have selected. Prompting on dates. Let's prompt on a date. Rec date. I can select it from here, although I could actually easily select it from the Fields tab. But since I'm sitting here on the Query tab, let's prompt on the rec date. Since I was grabbing it off the query tab, I want to make sure that I actually grab the right thing, because sometimes that query tab, there's no lines across, so sometimes it's hard to see what field you're actually picking up as criteria. So here is rec date, and now I want to make that a prompt. Oops, sorry. So I'm going to say new prompt. There's nothing I need to do here. I'm going to do an exact date. So let's say OK. And now let's look at criteria and make sure it's here OK. And here it is, my third prompt. Now, if I want to see all the prompts that I had, I can go over to the prompts tab and see all my prompts. So now I'm going to go back to my criteria tab. And here's my rec date. And now I'm going to save it and run it. And I'm going to put in Addie. I'm going to put in the account as sevens. And rec date, I want an exact date. So let's pick October 1st. And I've got my 6 records. I want to rerun this query and see what I get if I put in a different date. Let's put in, for example, if I can find it here, September 23rd. I don't get any results. Well, I happen to know that my requester, Addie, didn't start creating recs until October. So I would not expect to see results here. If I did, I'd know that there might be a problem with my query. So that's the advantage of rerunning the query whenever you're changing things. Notice that I go through those steps of creating the query, adding the field, adding records to the query, adding fields, creating criteria, and now what I've done as part of creating my criteria is I've added prompts. So now I've got those nice prompts. Now what if, for example, all I want to see, I don't really care about the requester ID, so I'm going to get rid of that prompt. Accounts, I'm okay with whatever accounts, so I think I'll get rid of that prompt. The other thing I don't want to see is I don't want to see the requester ID. And I'm not really interested in the rec ID. But I do want to see what recs were created under what account numbers for a particular date range. So I'm going to come back over here to my rec date, and you notice it's just equal to one particular date. So if I were to save and run it just as it is right now, all it's going to ask me for is a specific rec date. And I'm getting all Addie's because she's the only one that has created any recs for today. But what if I want to see what recs were created for a date range and how much money was spent? So what I might want to do is I might want to make this rec date a date range. So how I would do that is I have already got under rec date one piece of criteria and one prompt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this prompt. And I've already got one prompt for date. I want to add another date prompt. Because what I want to do is make a from and to range. So the second date prompt I'm going to call, I'm going to change the heading text and call it to rec date. And say OK. The other thing I want to do is I want to select my third prompt that I made, the original prompt for the day, and change the description a little bit. So I'm going to edit that prompt and change it to from rec day. So now I've got two prompts created for rec date. I did it right here on my edit criteria properties using the prompt and editing one prompt and creating one new prompt. Now you may ask, why did I go through that particular set of steps? Well, let's look at our prompt tab, which I said is not a great place to create a prompt, but it's a good place to look at prompts. And what I could have done is I could have created my prompts and done my edits right here, and it would have brought up that same particular pop-up page. So if I hit edit criteria, or edit, sorry, prompt, it would have brought up my edit prompt, and I could have made the changes here. But I could also do it, since I was sitting on the criteria tab anyway, I could do it right there on the criteria tab. So now I've got, for rec date, that single field, I've got a from and to. So how do I use those from and tos in my criteria? Well, when we're talking about from and to, we're talking about a range. And for ranges, we use the condition type of between. So let's look at that. I'll click on criteria tab. I will edit the rec date. And now I'm going to change my condition type to between. Now, because I changed this condition type, it changed this up here. There's two ways I can easily add date. One is by just typing it in here and just selecting and getting my date range that way, a from and to range. The other way I can do it is using the very bottom. Notice I've got the very top one that I'm using when I'm keying it in. I use the very bottom one to add prompts. And how I do that is I've already created my prompts. I can't use this unless I've created my prompts already. So now that I've created them and I've got expression selected, expression 1, I'll add my prompt for my from date. And then on the bottom, on expression 2, I will add my prompt for my to date. So now I've got my between this date and this date. Remember, with between, it's always inclusive. So in other words, whatever date I happen to use here, it's going to include items from that date, and whatever date I put in this particular box, it will include items from that date as well. So I'm going to say OK. I want to look and make sure that this is reading as I expect. And it's between 3 and 4, between the from date and the to date. So I'm going to say save. And I'm going to run my query. And for my query, I'm going to pick, because I want to see what recs I had at the end of September, if there are any, and what recs I created at the beginning of October. And what I noticed is I didn't have any for September, but I did for the end of September, but I did have these 6 for the beginning of October. I can rerun my query with other dates just to make sure that my query is working properly. So I can go back further in September, let's say about the 15th. And then include my October date. So this is my range now. I'm still getting the same amount of items. So let me try one more time and go back even further and see if there's anything within the month of September through October. No, I haven't done anything else in September. But you know, being the curious person that I am, I'm going to say, is my rec query really working? So I'm going to go back to the beginning of August and see if I have anything there. Oh, wow, yes, 34 recs were created. And there's a bunch in Creole and some in Fine. But keep in mind, this is a test database, so a lot of these are test items that we're creating for our testing purposes. So I'm pretty confident now, just looking at my query, that it works fine. And matter of fact, if all I wanted to do was to see how many queries I were done, I'm not interested in the department, and maybe I'm not interested in the project, because I'm not really trying to figure out, what was done in what department or project. I'm just trying to get a handle on how many recs are created. So what I want to do then is I'm going to get rid of some of these other items. Notice I'm paring this query down quite a lot. And I also am kind of interested in what the rec status is and whether they've been sourced. So now I'm going to rerun my query. I'm going to use the August date again. Matter of fact, I want to see just items created in August. So I'm going to just stay with August. And I see that there's a lot of recs created in August. But look at how many were created on the 18th. The 18th of August must have been a very busy day. And then the 20th of August just had a few. And so a lot of times that's how things run, that you'll see that a manager might use this query to say, for some reason the 18th was really busy. I wonder what we were doing that day that we had so many queries created in that way. And maybe it's because there was a move of a department or a new room opening up, a new lab, and so there was a lot more things that were created. But obviously, because this is a test environment, you notice a similarity in the amount fields. You can tell this is just testing. The other thing I notice is that I have statuses of P in here, and I'm not really sure what P is. Maybe I'm fairly new to this whole requisition part of financials, and I'm kind of curious as to what that status means. Well, we'll get into that in a little bit when we start talking about editing fields. So we come over to our criteria. We're pretty happy with that now. We've run it several times. We've made some tweaks to the fields to just bring up what we're really interested in looking at. And we notice that there's translate values in rec status and source status. And we'll get into that as we look at editing fields. So I'm going to save this query now because I'm pretty happy with it. And go back to Query Manager.